Syria, women need to get letters to leave their homes and to leave the country. In some of these countries, in Morocco, for example, half of the women are illiterate. They can't go to school. You're talking about stoning and genital mutilations and so forth. What is being said about apartheid in these countries by these activists? Absolutely nothing. Zero.
Now, I promised to get to Rebecca shortly, and I will, but I want to hear Joel French's reply to this. Avi pointed out the apartheid that's taking place in the Muslim countries against women, against gay people. How do you respond to this? In all fairness, how do you respond to this?
I would respond to that by saying a lot of our members are involved in a lot of different issues. This is not the only issue that we're active on. Personally, I'm also active on the issue of Darfur, which I wouldn't call apartheid, but I would call it ethnic cleansing, if not genocide. To say that we're not involved in any other issues, I think is completely false. And really, I'm not sure where your guest is getting that information from, that none of these people that are involved in this issue are involved in anything else. I think one thing that we point out at the beginning of all of our events, actually, that we have, not just our Israeli Apartheid Week events, but all of the events that we have throughout the year, is that we stand in solidarity with oppressed peoples all over the world, including people here in Canada. One thing that we do acknowledge at every event is that we have a system here in Canada, the reservation system, which is another method of separation, which we would also characterize as apartheid. So to try to say that this is the only conflict that any of the people that are involved in our movement are involved in, I think is completely false and is just a lack of education on the part of your guest.
I would counter that is absolutely false. There's absolutely nothing else that you can equate to Israel Apartheid Week happening by any of these groups on university campuses. Absolutely 100%. I've seen this. I've been around for at least 8-9 years. I was at the first conference at the University of Toronto where they had a goon come sit up to me in a lecture hall and start snapping away pictures to intimidate me. There's absolutely nothing else on university campus that draws so much attention, that is so in your face against, let's say, a so-called human rights issue as Israel Apartheid Week. And to say that there is absolutely false.
I wanted to chime in and
say, yes.
I think I would really like to respond to one thing that was said a little bit earlier, just because I think it's one of the core issues. One of your guests said that they supported a two-state solution, and I think it's really interesting to look at why a two-state solution hasn't been implemented, because it's voted on every single year in the United Nations General Assembly. It's interesting to note who votes against that solution. And the reality is that the two main dissenters are Israel and the United States. Since it's been proposed every single year, you can go online to the United Nations website, check the voting record, read the resolution, and see what exactly it encompasses. And I think it's very clear that the Palestinian people, if not the elected Palestinian officials, which should be distinguished from each other, as well as the Arab League, all 22 members of it, have supported the two-state solution as is laid out in UN Resolution 242 that has been on the table since the 1970s.
There are a lot of complexities involving the Middle East, and that's something we're going to get into shortly, but I know that Rebecca has been waiting to say something. Rebecca, go ahead.
Well, I think that I take your passion for human rights very seriously, and unfortunately, I think then your involvement in Israel Apartheid Week is misguided. On our campus, I go to McMaster University. I have many times, at least a few times every year, come and approached the group who organizes Israel Apartheid Week, and I've said, listen, I'm also concerned about the conflict in the Middle East. I'd love to find an academic way to discuss these issues in a way that's informed, in a way that is productive, in a way that is pursuing of peace. Unfortunately, they've rejected my offer every time. I've offered them to do Two States for Two Peoples Week. We can talk about two states in a second. I've offered them to do Palestinian Human Rights Week. I've offered them to do Pro-Palestine Week. all of the permutations of empowering Palestinians that I can imagine. And they've said no. And they've preferred only to use Israel Apartheid Week. So tell me why. I mean, I think it's a very inflammatory term that gets people really excited. And the latest, the most recent time that I've offered this, they've said, well, Israel Apartheid Week gets our members really excited. It's the event that we look forward to every year. So I'm saying, these groups on campus who are running Israel Apartheid Week, do you really want to help Palestinian people who no doubt have issues? No doubt. Are you really seeking that? Or is it an opportunity to put Israel on the gallows and kind of, it's not moving anywhere. It's not productive.
One thing we can't do is justice to this program without talking about some of the complexities, and we'll try to keep it as simple as possible, that's going on in Israel and around that area. One has to do with Hamas, a major player here. Just take, for example, recently a news article came out that the Palestinians were furious against Egypt for blocking some of the trade going on in their food trade underground, because it was suspected that they were transporting weapons. And for a long time, Egypt has been careful with doing this because they didn't want to worsen the conditions for the Palestinian people. But because of this factor, because of that Hamas dynamic, which we cannot turn away from, it's become a major issue involving Egypt as well. I'd like you to respond to this, Dr. Hart.
Well, I think that's a real case in point when you think in terms of here you have sitting on the border of Israel an entity that calls for the destruction of Israel, that has still enshrined in its charter the destruction of Israel.
Linked to Iran, by the way.
Linked to Iran, a proxy of Iran, as is Hezbollah for that matter. Israel is in a very unsafe neighborhood, and when we start to think in terms of why Israel does what it does, much of it is brought upon it not through its own making, but through the demands to maintain its own security, its own sovereignty, and the safety of its people. It's constantly under attack. It needs to be vigilant all of the time. And the example of Hamas is a very good one. But if one translates that then into this terminology that's being used on our campuses of Israel Apartheid, that too is a very destructive entity. It's destructive not only in terms of the demonization that we've already spoken of, but if you think about what apartheid means and how apartheid is regarded in the general context, way back in 1973, the United Nations declared it as a crime. And in 2002, the International Criminal Court, through the Rome Statute, declared it as a crime against humanity. Once you begin to label someone as criminal, that has very serious connotations. It's not far away when you talk about a criminal, you begin to marginalize, you begin to ostracize, and it's not long before you begin to dehumanize. And that's what we have a real fear about, is that when you begin to use this terminology so loosely, but so specifically in terms of a particular people, and when you threaten their peoplehood, we all need to take that very seriously, because that creates hatred not only within our community, but in terms of Israel Apartheid Week, particularly on our campuses. Is this the way we want to proceed? I don't think so. Rebecca's spoken very eloquently towards the sort of bridge building that should occur, but as long as the slur, the slander against Jewish peoplehood and against Israel remains, there's very little opportunity for us to come together and begin to create the sorts of bridges that are so vital to create harmony on our campuses.
Okay, and we're going to have to go for a break again, but I'll tell you how I'm going to do this as soon as we come back from the break. We're going to get straight to you on the phone lines, and we're going to ask you to make your comments very quickly, because right after that, I want to go back to Joel French, our guest from out in Edmonton, because as I said earlier, this issue was causing divisions among the NDP members. And 2006, there was a party convention that actually recognized Hezbollah as a legitimate party. This is another complexity added into this mess. We're going to talk about it after the break. Don't go away.